The wind howled low through the canyons that night, carrying with it the smell of rain and distant smoke. And out on the edge of the desert where the sagebrush grew tall and the world seemed carved from nothing but dust and bone, a man named Colton Reeves sat on his porch, boots propped against the rail, hat pulled low to shield his eyes from the storm rolling in. He was a man the town whispered about, a man who'd once worn a deputy's badge until the day he came home to find his wife and son taken by outlaws, their bodies left in the dirt, the law doing nothing but writing reports no one read. And from that day on, Colton had lived alone, speaking to no one, trusting nothing but the weight of his Colt revolver and the silence of the plains. Until that night, when a figure stumbled into the dim circle of lamplight spilling from his cabin window. At first, he thought it was a trick of the shadows, maybe an animal, but then he saw her. A woman, barefoot, soaked from the rain, dress torn and clinging to her like it was part of her skin, blood seeping from the side of her face, hands trembling as she clutched a shawl tight around her, eyes darting like a cornered deer, and in a voice raw from either crying or screaming, she whispered, "Please, don't look at my face," as if the very act might destroy her. Colton froze, a dozen questions burning through his mind, but something in the way her voice broke, in the way she shrank from him without stepping back, told him this wasn't about vanity or shame. This was about survival, about something done to her so vile she could barely breathe under the weight of it. He stepped slowly forward, saying nothing, and guided her inside, the old floorboards creaking under her light steps, her bare feet leaving faint tracks of blood and rainwater. He set her near the fire, turned to fetch a blanket, but when he came back she was hunched over, hiding her face in her hands, and he caught a glimpse of the deep, purple welts along her wrists where rope had bit into her skin. "They said, if anyone saw me, they'd finish what they started," she murmured, and Colton felt something deep and dangerous stir in him. The same cold rage that had driven him to hunt the men who'd taken his family years ago. He knelt beside her, voice low and steady, telling her she was safe here, but she only shook her head, her shoulders trembling. Finally, with a shiver that seemed to pull the strength right out of her, she lowered her hands, the firelight catching the jagged scar running from her temple down across her cheek to the corner of her mouth, a cruel, deliberate mark left to brand her like cattle. And Colton's breath left him in a rush, his knees hitting the floor as if something holy had struck him down, not because of the scar, but because of the eyes looking back at him, eyes so full of pain and defiance it felt like staring into a mirror of his own soul. "Who did this?" he asked, his voice like gravel over steel, and when she whispered the name, a name he knew all too well, belonging to a gang that had been bleeding the territory for years, Colton stood, the boards groaning under his boots, and began checking his rifle, loading each round with a care that was almost tender. Because this wasn't going to be a simple killing. No, this was going to be a reckoning. He told her to stay by the fire, to lock the door behind him, but when he turned to go, she caught his hand, holding it like it was the last rope keeping her from drowning, and in that moment he made her a promise, softly, but with a weight that could bend iron, that no one would ever touch her again. He rode out into the storm, tracking the gang's trail through mud and moonless dark, the memories of his own loss burning hot enough to keep him warm. And by dawn, the first man never saw the bullet that took him, the second fell with a knife in his throat, the third begged before Colton sent him to join the others, and when he finally stood before the leader, a man grinning under the brim of a black hat, Colton didn't smile, didn't speak, just pulled the trigger and left him for the coyotes. When he returned to the cabin, soaked in blood and rain, the woman, whose name he now knew was Clara, was still by the fire, but when she saw him, She didn't flinch. Instead, she stood, the blanket slipping from her shoulders, and for the first time, she let him see her without the shadow of fear in her eyes. Over the weeks that followed, Clara began to heal, not just in body, but in spirit, and though the townsfolk stared when they saw her scar, they stared longer at the way Colton looked at her, like she was the only sunrise worth seeing. By spring, they were working the ranch together, laughter starting to replace the silence, and Colton knew the night she stumbled into his life hadn't been fate. It had been a call, and he had answered. And friend, if stories of courage, redemption, and the kind of fight that turns broken people into something unbreakable speak to you, then don't just ride off into the sunset. Subscribe now, because there are more tales from the Wild West that will hit you straight in the heart.